Great. Thanks, Jeff. I am going to load up. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
The social media one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So also, I should actually check if can you still see the same screen? Okay, great.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being here on a Friday evening. I'm really excited to dig into this stuff because it is, first of all, I think really fundamental to organizing in general, and especially given the context now where we aren't allowed to gather in person. I am, let's see. So I'm Alex. I am a PhD student in political science and American politics at Hopkins. So I started just recently, but I also come from a long campaign background. I worked in electoral politics, but also in community organizing, where I spent most of my time thinking about how to bridge the gap between online organizing and offline organizing, because you see a lot of activity on Twitter and Facebook, but can you actually really translate that into something that will help you achieve your campaign's goals, whatever campaign you define that as. So, I mean, there are a few of us. I would love if I could get a sense of, before moving on, what people's background is with digital organizing. And maybe I should also say, for one, Norm, since we're not that many people, just unmute yourself instead of using the chat box, but if you could use the raise hand function. Does everybody know how to use that? Yeah. Okay, great. So why don't we go ahead. Sorry, Zoom. All right. Why don't you go ahead? Actually, I'll just go through. Felicity, would you like to start?
Yes, I have no background in social media organizing, really. There were just a few things we did as part of our societies at our universities, but it was sort of organizing within a community that's already established. It wasn't really organizing to get the attention of people outside of that community.
Okay. Karen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would also say I also don't have a background with social media organizing. I'm a huge consumer, like most people, of social media, but I'm really interested in learning that organizing aspect, I would say.
Great. Jeff Henderson?
Don't really have any personal experience with digital organizing. I've done collaborative research with multiple organizations who've used various forms of digital advertising and email outreach to folks to build sort of their movements to get people involved. But I've been involved more as a researcher rather than a practitioner.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I moderate and run multiple Facebook pages and Instagrams and Twitters, you know, from like I like run a lot of the old Bernie stuff that, and now there's new sort of things but yeah, mainly I've done other stuff, and I like post all my annoying opinions, you know, on social media.
Great. And Jeff?
Yeah, no real exposure to digital organizing outside of like the last couple of weeks, I suppose, of COLA. I think I am really excited. I think similar to what I think Jeff noted, it's mostly my exposures toward like academic research and things of that nature. So I'm pumped to see how to kind of see digital organizing in practice.
Great. Okay. Well, that's really helpful. It helps me kind of gauge how to approach this. Also, I'm going to say the slides that I'm using have the OFA marker in the bottom right corner. This is an artifact of my previous workplace, and I really like their branding and theme colors, and I am a total Luddite. This is one thing that I think is maybe important context, is that I do not know how to use a lot of technologies. Like, give me a TV remote control and I'll be busy for 3 hours. I just don't know how to use some of this stuff, but that doesn't matter because digital is not actually about the tech. And that's one thing that I think is a key takeaway, is that you don't have to know how to code. You don't have to know how to do fancy things. These are tools. But for the moment, I am going to apologize for my anachronistic slides. So I have a few goals for today. I'm going to do a lot of talking, but I really would love if people would jump in. For whatever reason, being a Luddite, I can't figure out how to see the chat box anymore. So, and I can't see it when you raise your hand. So maybe if, Jeff, if you'd be able to keep an eye on the chat box or the raise hand function to let me know what's going on over there would be great. If you'd like to jump in, just raise a hand and Jeff will call on you. Yeah, I really do want this to be interactive. I want this to be something that we can actually really dive into together, and I want to get into some group discussion. So there's a lot to cover. First thing is just going over some of the basic principles of what is organizing, what is mobilizing, what's the difference between the two, and why do we need to know that? Second thing is using kind of an evaluative tool to see how well we can measure the relationships that we build. And then the third is, given how crazy everything is right now, it's easy to feel like the rug has been pulled out from underneath of you in your organizing efforts, or that you're having to move into a whole new world of organizing, and one that may feel unfamiliar. But I'm hoping that by the end of this, you'll feel more confident in how you're approaching this, and that it's actually not all that complicated. You just need to know some, be grounded in some important principles first. I'm gonna leave time to ask questions at the end of each section too. So if you have like a 2-finger or something important that you want to clarify before moving ahead, use the raise hand function, but otherwise we're gonna pause for questions along the way. So here's what we've got. We've got 3 sections. You're gonna work on some stuff, and then we're gonna debrief. I think that's a really important piece of this as well. So first, to start out with a little bit of a personal story, my stepfather is from Lithuania. This is not him, this is his father. They don't have very many photos from that time. But he was a refugee. He was born in 1944 when the Soviets were invading, and his father had to run out of a work building and grab the family and flee to the farm, like the country, to his aunt's farm. And then they fled to Germany, where apparently in 1944, there were refugee camps, and that was apparently safe for them. So that's where he grew up, where he spent the first 5 or 6 years of his life. The reason that the Soviets were so successful was because they had a tactic to where they would just ask pretty innocuous questions of everybody, and essentially triangulate all the information that they were getting to spy on people. So they would say, oh, doesn't your brother go to these meetings on Tuesdays? We didn't see him there. Or what time did he come home? Or whatever it is. And what that ended up doing was destroy trust between people. They had found a way to invade the most intimate connections between people and erode those connections. They became further and further isolated from each other. And then what do? How do you form collective action if you don't actually have a collective? The Soviets took over, and then they were in power for about 50 years after that. So it was very, very effective. Of course, they were using other means as well. And I am not a historian, so I'm sure there was a whole lot going on there. But that it's kind of legend, it's kind of lore that this was the way that their family was being torn apart, and the way that they needed to flee in order to maintain the trust between each other. So first things first, in order to maintain that trust, you have to build it. So you have to make little efforts to develop social capital. And has everybody here encountered social capital? Great. So there are a lot of different definitions. There's a lot of disagreement in definitions, but some key parts of it are trust within these social networks. There's reciprocity involved, as well as cooperation. So we don't actually have the Soviets to invade and to destroy this trust that we have with the teams that we build in our movements, whether that's the strike itself or what, but we have to actively counteract the disintegration of the relationships that is happening right now. Physical distance does not have to mean social distance. Your efforts don't have to stop just because you can't get together with people. Social capital is really important because you're not just building that trust, you're actually building durable relationships. And you have to be able to find ways to constantly reach out and touch your people, figuratively speaking, to be able to then leverage the power, leverage those relationships, and ask for help at key moments. So let's break it down a little bit more, because there's two big categories within this. Bonding capital, as you can see on the left-hand side, is within a group or community. It's good at going deep. Bridging capital, on the other hand, is between social groups. So it's more about building weak ties. It connects clusters of people, of strong ties, to one another. It's great for spreading information widely. It's great for gaining exposure, for calling people to action. But it's not going to perform the core function of actually getting intimate and deep and developing those core bonds that you need. So this all sounds like great theory, but how do we apply this to running a campaign? We need to think about how it maps onto the concepts of organizing and mobilizing. So is there anybody who would like to take a stab at the definition of organizing? I can't see any hands, so you might have to.
Oh, Jeffrey's.
I can give a definition.
Say that again.
So, my understanding of organizing is that it's affecting a transformation in a constituency. Like it's essentially, instead of just sort of taking people who are already motivated and just mobilizing them, it's allowing people to understand their capacity to be agents of change, or engaging people in conversations that allow them to recognize how their preferences might translate into public action.
Yeah, great. One key word that you had was transformation. And I think that there are a lot of pieces of that. There's an understanding of yourself that's different by skill building, but it's also relational. So I like to think of this as the place where you build the bonding capital, where you build those deep, intimate ties. And so, I mean, there's no technical definition, but it nourishes the people that make your advocacy possible. That can include yourself, your team, and the partners you're working with. So there's lots of layers to this. When you're talking about yourself, that's developing leadership skills or learning how to manage better. It's learning how to tell your personal story in a way that can touch people through not facts, but at a more emotional level, which is something that triggers empathy and allows people to kind of connect to you on a different level. and bypass a lot of the talking points that often get in the way. Then one concentric circle larger is your team. You could think of that as, we used to think of it in terms of chapters. So that is your chapter meetings. It could even be pizza parties. It's anytime you gather as a group, developing that group structure, how well the dynamic is, how people are operating with each other, whether that's it encourages a healthy psychological safe space for people to make mistakes or iterate, brainstorm. It's about developing that core dynamic. And then at the largest concentric circle is the movement. It's the network of people that you're operating with. That includes your partners, that includes your press contacts if you're trying to build salience. It includes any coalition tables that you have. In the context of the strike, that would be the network of universities. But these are kind of the three key pieces to think about when you're developing your organizing activities. How about mobilizing? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I think something along the lines of getting people to do short actions that they can do individually, although in the context of doing it with other people. So I think signing petitions, getting people to turn out, to show up at rallies, at protests, at marches, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. And in the language of bonding and bridging capital, I would say that it uses both bonding and bridging capital because of the degree of exposure that bridging gives you. It allows you to connect to more people and get them all to show up. So if you're posting something on Twitter, for example, that goes out to all the followers, all the people retweet it, even their followers, and then everybody shows up at a protest, right? That's the stereotypical picture of what mobilization looks like. But it's also leveraging bonding capital in the sense that it's not just tapping individual people a lot of the time, it's also tapping the networks that they're connected to. You are, when you're retweeting something, say I have 30 followers, but Felicity has 30,000. I don't have access to those people, but she has, a core group of, a core network that she can pass along this information to. So I think of it sometimes in terms of muscle. When you're organizing, you're building the muscle. You're in training. You're getting your bicep bigger if that's what you're working out. And then the mobilizing is actually flexing it. It's showing your power. It's showing the capacity that you have. It's threatening the decision makers by showing the degree to which you can actually really mess things up. And then there are three key pieces to this that are important. One is the purpose. That's protecting or defending an issue. It's trying to make a change on a particular subject. So here it's a cost of living adjustment. It is the direction. So that's where you're pointing your efforts towards. That's the decision makers. It's influencing them. It's understanding the power map to know where you're putting leverage. And then there's action or visibility. That is the degree to which you are performing this for the public. So expanding the scope of conflict, making it more salient, making it at the top of the agenda as you build your narrative. So my controversial argument is that we're really bad at bonding, or at least bad in a comparative lens. What's happening now society-wide is that we just don't invest as much time or energy into developing these core relationships. So Jane McAlevey, who is a scholar, she's a union activist, she talks about the need for structure-based organizing, which is basically tapping into pre-existing institutions or networks of strong ties in order to build your base. That way you don't have to reach out to 12,000 people. You can reach out to 4,000 and all of the people within their networks. Now we have to work really hard because those institutions are not quite as strong. Trust in those institutions is an all-time low. Unions are fighting on their back heels. They're in a defensive position for the most part. There are lots of examples. So now we have to work really hard in order to get this group of people all together and to develop these relationships from scratch. In some ways, the university provides a really great ground for this because we already have networks in terms of our departments, but they take work as well. There are lots of things that are causing us to kind of spin out in different directions. We spend record amounts of time on virtual networks, which primarily grow bridging capital, which is important. We need that in order to be able to scale up really quickly. But your attention is a commodity online. Not only your friends, but lots of other things are vying for it. And so if we don't actually think about the degree to which we have healthy bonding capital and that we have to work harder at developing that, then we're not actually approaching digital tools in the right way. So in other words, if you want to make a difference, you have to make sure that you've got the kind of people in your corner that will take high risks for you, that will show up for you for yet another boring meeting, even though it's their sister's birthday, and that they'll do it as long as is necessary. And the thing that matters most for this, the thing that makes it most sustainable, is not necessarily the issue itself, because commitment to that can wax and wane. People can grow weary. They can decide that they're just going to deal with it. The thing that matters most is the relationships, because people will constantly reach out to you. They hold you accountable. They connect to your values, and they make you want to work harder. So as one example, think back to the Montgomery bus boycott. It was 381 days long, which is a really long time if you think about it. I mean, the COLA strike has been going on for, I mean, I guess it depends on which campus you're at, but certainly not over a year. And then consider also that the people who were boycotting were also people who were extremely economically vulnerable. They were the ones who were least likely to have private cars. Buses were the way they got to work, earned money, fed their families. It was a severe hardship to give it up. And they didn't know that it was going to stop at 381 days, right? They had to keep going, even though imagining that it was going to be 500 days, 600 days, they had to keep going and sustain their spirits. So while a march may get the attention of hundreds of thousands of people for a day, maybe even a few weeks, maybe a month, maybe a little bit longer than that, what you see are these peaks of activity and then lulls. And those lulls are where the organizing has to happen. Those lulls are where you have to build relationships. That's the only way that you're going to get close to transforming the status quo. But well, before I get to this, I did want to mention, let's see, where is it? Well, actually, yeah, let's move on. What questions do you have so far?
You know, this might seem, sorry, I'm not sure if I should raise my hand first or if I should just go ahead with the question.
Please.
Yeah, it might seem like a trivial question, but one thing that I've really noticed, looking at the COLA movement, is the sort of power of memes. And again, like, I'm not sure if this is a trivial question, but I really do think there's something there where it seems like, making these memes gives people a chance to relate to the movement in a different level, in like a sort of nuanced way. And even though, maybe on the surface level, memes are very, I don't know, again, trivial, maybe they're just supposed to be funny. I'm wondering what your take on memes are in creating these sort of social movements and creating perhaps these relationships with other folks. Do you see it as like a tool or another sort of means as to reach out to folks, whether or not it's supposed to be superficial or on a deeper connection?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in one way, there's a lot of sense making that's happening when they're creating these memes, right? They're kind of personalizing things. So in a way, that can be organizing in the sense that it's understanding your own involvement in it and giving you something tangible that's outside of your head to um, to point to as your attachment to the issue. On the other hand, it's not helping develop relationships necessarily. So, in terms of actually creating the sustainability of a movement, I don't think that they're going to get you to where you want to be. But one of the key points is that organizing and mobilizing are not necessarily ever really separable. They feed into each other. So you have these marches and you have these big spikes. But what you can do at those spikes is capture that energy and then transition it into organizing. There are a couple different things you can do, right? Is one, you can see who's there, you can get their contact information, you can have a fun conversation, and then you can follow up later. And in so doing, you're building your team and you're building the relationship. It's like a very consistent thing. Or you can just go home and not actually have the way to connect with people afterwards. And that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people are somewhere in between. It's hard. I mean, you have to strike up a conversation at a march or a protest or something like that. If you're an introvert, I tend to be more on the introverted side. That's not exactly the easiest thing to do. But there has to be some kind of apparatus or some kind of mechanism where you're taking that mobilization and you're pushing it towards the organizing. And so memes can help mobilize things, but then you got to capture that energy and you got to transition it into how do you build relationships with those people from there. Yeah, Jeff. I can see the hands. Oh, no, Gene.
Thanks. Yeah. So just to follow up on that, you mentioned that organizing is also sort of a prime thing that you can do in lulls of activity. And so you've talked about how like when activity's happening, you can like translate that activity into the kind of relationship building that can build for the long term. But I'd be curious to hear more about like when there's not a lot of activity going on, like not a lot of offline actions, or the target that's being pursued might seem more distant. Like what are sort of some practical steps that can be taken to organize in those instances?
Yeah, really good question. I think then you have to go to the pre-existing relationships. You have to build on that. So, hi, Mel. So, if there isn't an opportunity to make connections with people that you don't know already, but you're committed to a particular issue, or because you're already part of a group that is, then not everybody knows the same people, right? Unless you're in a very exclusive group or a very insular group, everybody has contacts that are outside of it. So using this time to get creative on not just reaching out to the people who you come into contact with every day or your friends and family, but also, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but digital, they're just tools to actually amplify what you're doing already. It's a megaphone. So, one creative idea could be troll through your Facebook list. Who are you friends with? Who could you actually reach out to? Maybe that's not the way to go. I'm just kind of riffing off the top of my head here, but there are ways to begin to tap into pre-existing networks. There's also, think about the institutions of people, the networks of people that would be really interested in an issue that you're organizing around. So that could be student groups. It could be maybe institutions or nonprofits that work in higher education. Where can you find people who may not even necessarily become volunteers or supporters themselves, but can connect you with more volunteers and supporters? Anybody else before we move on? Okay.
I'll use the raise hand feature because I'm a host. But obviously, the issue now with the Cola movement is that, the lull is happening obviously as a result of like the shutdown and the pandemic. So in terms of like reaching out to all of these institutions and groups, is there sort of a question of timing? Like, is that something you would do under the conditions now? Do you wait but risk lose the momentum you already have? Like, given that there's obviously going to be a priority list that people will have under the current situations, and it wouldn't be, you know, our movement, even within our institution.
There's a lot in there, and I think I might ask you for some more specificity just because I'm not very familiar with what's happening right now.
Yeah. So basically, at the very least, at the UC level, because there's sort of so much chaos and they don't know how much money they're going to have in the full quarter, it's sort of, we had built up a lot of sympathy, and there was a sort of an acknowledgement that, you know, the graduate student situation was far more of a crisis than they thought it was. And there was, you know, they were making moves to at least ameliorate the worst of the situation. But it's sort of everything has been put on pause until they know basically what their financial situation is going to be. So it's the type of thing that at best we can maintain the pressure, but we're not going to get sort of any immediate answers until the full quarter, because no institution anywhere is able to knows what's going to happen in 3 months, much less 6. And so under those conditions, how do you like maintain the organizing and build new relationships when people are, you know, stressed and losing their jobs and worried about having to lay people off?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this gets more into strategy and into understanding the motivations of the decision makers and the constraints that they face. So in order to help your case, it's always a really good idea to understand and to show that you sympathize with the situations that they are facing, so that they can't just build you into a straw man. But in terms of if there is something that they can do now, so for example, if people are losing their jobs, maybe they can put a hold on that. Or I don't actually know the specifics, but understanding kind of the range of options that are available and the ways that you can use these as milestones. So in the second section, I'll talk a little bit more about what's called closure to events. You have to build kind of little milestones along the way to keep your team motivated, essentially, to show that that there's a window of action, and then you can finish, you can debrief, you can see the influence that you had, you can see how you need to transition your strategy or your tactics. But a lot of it has to do, and so that can actually be very beneficial if you can find those small ways. That can actually bring people more into the movement because they can see that there are little wins happening along the way. In the absence of something that the university itself can do, then you can find other ways to create those little moments. It would take a lot of creativity, and easy ones do not jump out immediately. But it could be just like building up a network, a team of just like a social team. I imagine that might happen at the department level. And to, you know, have the way people are being creative now with the social distancing might be a way to get into this is, you know, social distance happy hours or whatever it is. Find some creative ways to have social events to keep that team building, that relationship going. That's tough. Okay. Let's jump on into the next section then. So this is well, this is what I would love to do, and we've done a little bit of it just kind of together as a group, but I'd like to get a little bit more into the two dimensions of organizing and mobilizing. Think now, let's make it concrete. Write down, what team do you think you're building? And then what do you believe that you're building those relationships for? Be as specific as you can be. Let's just start there. We'll get into the organizing and mobilizing in a second. I'm going to give you a few minutes. Let's say till, what is it, 4:53. All right, and then moving on, write down the ways that you are currently building those relationships, whether that's for yourself, skill building, for your team, to build the dynamic that's going to bring you closer together and build that that bonding capital, those strong ties. And then third, what are the ways in which you can help build the network of universities working on this issue? Let's give you 5 minutes, so 4:58. So I'm going to give everybody a couple seconds to wrap up if they haven't already. But the key question that follows from this is at the title of the slide, right? What are you actually building these relationships for? So are you trying to make the work more sustainable? Are you trying to grow your leadership team for that reason? Are you trying to build the number of people who are willing to support the cause? But then within that, do you mean support by going on strike? Do you mean donating to make the work possible? Do you mean provide temporary housing so that you can put another angle of pressure on the university system? But then also, what is the directionality of this? What's the purpose? Um, are you trying to gain trust in order to put extra leverage on the people who um, control the levers, who have the ability to make this change? Do you Are you trying to look at, or are you trying to build relationships with them maybe in order to gain their trust, so that when you go to them with demands, they will know that you're not just crazy and that you're going to be out to get them no matter what? What are you trying to build these teams for, this network for? So think on that, but also I'd like to invite you to kind of share what you wrote down for the first part of it, of the team that you're trying to build, and then say why you think you're building that team, what purpose it has. Yeah, Felicity.
So I think the team I'm trying to build is one, I mean, that's obviously committed to some kind of work and sacrifice vis-a-vis the Cold Movement, because obviously a lot of people support the idea, but when it actually comes to showing up the meetings and doing a lot of the work, like, they're not doing it. So I need people, first off, who are willing to do that. But also a team that has institutional knowledge of the UC, or is willing to learn and do the research to gain institutional knowledge of the UC. Because I think this is one of the things that we've been struggling to get across at the movement, is understanding the motivations of the decision makers, who are the decision makers, and who it's actually worth our effort putting pressure on, and who it isn't. And especially with the UC, that's such an enormous bureaucracy, we can waste a lot of energy pressuring the wrong people who actually have no power, no influence to give us what we want.
Would it be okay actually if we stopped recording during the sharing moment and then started recording again afterward?
Great, thank you for thinking of that.
Sure.
Oh, Mel is saying that you can edit things out later. So I see that you were still recording. So I think, yeah, looks like we can be good.
Okay.
Is there anybody else who would like to share?
I'll stop recording if somebody wants to share.
Oh, I can go.
Tell me when.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Get as specific as you can with this section too, because the more you can narrow down who your team is, who you actually need to spend time on developing within your team. Maybe somebody's like kind of in, kind of out. Who, like, what their motivations are, so that you can get them fully in. How your team is structured. Is it there's one leader who kind of delegates out, and lots of kind of team leads or issue leads? So maybe one person is the person who is tasked with figuring out how things are working in the administration, or finding people who know people in the administration and can figure out who to talk to. And everybody comes back together for the meetings with like tasks that have been checked off. What is the structure that you're putting into place? And then that'll also help you understand the skill building that you need to invest in as well. So we've got all these amazing classes up online. What are the ones that you need to make sure that the people within your team are attending so that they have the appropriate skills to be able to contribute to the team in the way that it needs? And then also the team within the university-wide structure, or sorry, the UC-wide structure. Like, what does Santa Barbara really need to be good at? What does Santa Cruz really need to be good at? How can they leverage the particular skills of the areas, of the people in each of those areas, to be able to contribute to one unified effort? That's hard. And the bigger you go, the more the collective action problem hits. But think as specifically as you can in order to have a more concrete problem to solve, and to be able to diagnose really well what's going on in your current team. What do you need? What does each individual need? And what does the group dynamic need? Is it a healthy one where people feel like they can express their thoughts and ideas? Or is there a lot of conflict? How do you resolve that conflict? That was not intended to be overwhelming. But there's a lot that you can think about at each of these levels. And then layering on top of that, okay, the strategy is determined by then how you need to mobilize people. So if you're mobilizing people to put pressure on the university president, I don't know, what does your team structure need to look like? If you're actually mobilizing people to put pressure on the state legislature, what does that do to your structure? What does that do to the locality of your teams? Do you actually need to build one up in Sacramento, even though there isn't a UC there? I don't think. Gosh, I don't know. I'm sorry. Think about the ways that the mobilizing strategy can help inform your organizing efforts. And then also visibility. So if you're trying to increase the exposure that this issue gets, you need to make sure that you're getting media coverage. That means developing relationships with reporters, not just your team or with the UCs. It means developing a message and a frame that can be used throughout. And you know, if it's too difficult to do it within all of the UCs, then at each university level, so that you can be consistent in your messaging, consistent in your demands, and be able to feel confident that whoever the lead is in your team who's responsible for working on relationships with reporters, or getting exposure for your events and your challenges, can do so successfully. Any questions on that? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I guess like, do you have like any recommendations in terms of like how to think about like the infrastructure that would allow for that? Because there's so many different elements. And so I'm curious if you could like touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. It's a point of contention that actually Andy might have some different ideas on. But the structure that I am familiar with and that has worked well for a long time is the snowflake model, where you have a nucleus, you have the spokes coming off of the nucleus, and then you have smaller nuclei, then you've got spokes coming off of those smaller nuclei. So it is good, I think, in terms of communication within a larger structure like this, especially one that's as challenging and diffuse as the UC system. It is helpful to have point people, whatever you call them, whether they're captains or leads or however you kind of confine the centralization of their power, so to speak. There are, you know, I would encourage you to think through how you can develop kind of norms and guidelines for the people who serve in that position, to make sure that they're being transparent, that they're bringing information, that they're reporting back on what they are sending out to the other UCs. But then within that, everybody, I would say that it's a good strategy to try to give everybody a role, because that helps them become invested in this. So you could, I mentioned somebody who's responsible for getting relationships with press, whether that is local press or I mean, you could also roll that person into a digital person, unless you want to keep those separate, to have more people have more roles, in order to be able to push the narrative out to more people, and to try to work on getting that kind of exposure. Karen mentioned memes earlier. That's something that that person can do. You could have, on the other side of what a digital person would do, is also making sure to connect, build the list of people that you have always at events, or when like pushing content out on digital. Keep a record of the people that you're interacting with, so that you can come back to them in the future and begin to build a relationship with them in the future. Having a list is really helpful for that, because it is a record. But it's also not enough. This is one of the things that's difficult about digital, is that it can't end there. And just pushing out like one-sided information is not a relationship. And that's a lot of the reason that I decided to go to grad school, was because the whole progressive movement is doing that, and it's destroying relationships. So always keep the relationship at the center. I'd be happy to talk about that further too, in more specific detail. I could find some resources, but I think a snowflake model is something that has worked well, despite the challenges that I'm sure people have encountered. Time check. It is 8:13 my time. So, oh yeah, Karen.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a quick question. I actually am not familiar with the snowflake model, so I was wondering if you could maybe describe another model that is commonly used, or another model that maybe opposes that snowflake model.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Andy was talking about his work with Bernie, and I think that is a more distributed organizing model, where you have these big, and I hope I'm not doing it injustice through my explanation, because I have less experience with it, but where you have like big caches of people, and you invite everybody to be a leader immediately, and you say, anybody who wants to participate can participate. We're going to give you all the tools to do so. But it's more of like, imagine like a mass conference call, and you say, anybody who wants to jump in and take the next step, like hit 5 or whatever it is. And then you gather all those people, and then you push them more towards leadership positions. It can be very effective at achieving scale really quickly. I tend to think that there's a lot of relationship building that gets lost along the way, but I'm sure there are people who would counter that.
Thanks.
Good question. So yeah, I'm gonna move on to the next section to make sure that we get through some of this stuff, and hopefully even with a few minutes left over, so you guys don't have to sit here for 2 whole hours. But the big takeaway from this whole section is digital is not different. You are still organizing, you are still mobilizing. The only reason that I know all this about strategy is not because I was a field organizer. In fact, I have knocked doors probably, the number of times I've done that is probably on at least 2 hands, if not 1 hand. It has to be a huge part of the way that you orient everything that you do on digital. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of people who are building up these mass lists and then using them for small dollar fundraising, or for pushing out key messaging and getting everybody kind of talking along the same talking points. But but it does not engender the kind of commitment that you need. So everything that you're thinking through now is just, it has to be grounded in organizing and mobilizing. It has to be grounded in how well is my bonding capital developed? How well is my bridging capital developed? The philosophy should not change. Digital tools are just that. They help you achieve scale, and they change the medium, but it's an opportunity to be creative about how you build that social capital. And the disadvantage of them is that it's really, really hard to build the bonding capital online. And that's something that has been a puzzle for a really long time, and there are no easy fixes. There's a lot of art and not all that much science. It's not a quantitative thing, but it is possible. And I think that when we move into the next section, you'll see what I mean. So here we are. It's hard to change the status quo. Attention is not commitment. Relationships make the difference. Coming back to this, grounding ourselves in this. How do you evaluate it? How do you know how good a relationship is, how strong it is, how weak it is? Unless you know like social network analysis, it's really hard to do that. And even then, I'm not sure that it really tells you what exactly you need to know for this kind of work. So there's this concept called sense of community. It is a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that they matter to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together. So this is about how to build that bonding capital. And there are a few key factors that go into this that make it easier to kind of break a relationship down and see, okay, what's going on here? How can I encourage a strong sense of cohesion? I call them the MIS factors, or maybe it's MIS. It's membership, influence, integration and fulfillment of needs, or you can also call that reinforcement, and shared emotional connection. This is from a couple social psychologists who have been writing about it since at least the 70s. There's a diverse literature on what sense of community is. Nobody knows how to actually define community. It's a very, very flexible term. But in terms of actually building group cohesion, these are 4 factors in a scale that they have seen to prove pretty valid. So let's go through them one by one. Membership has a few key pieces to it. And at first glance, they can seem a little bit disconcerting or uncomfortable. So boundaries, we don't often think that boundaries are amazing things. Or even the term membership can feel very exclusive. And in fact, it is exclusive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to have a negative valence to it. There are people who are willing to turn out for your strikes or the events that you put on, and then there are people who are not. That's okay. It just helps you define, okay, who are the people that we are working with? Who are the people that we want to bring into the fold? How do we know when they're a supporter or not? Because you can talk to everybody, but that's not going to be a great use of your time. So, and it also, understanding who is a part of this and who is committed to it can help people feel a sense of belonging. So this is often created through language, dress, ritual. They can be super subtle so that only the in-group knows that they're actually a part of it. So like a flash mob or a secret society or something like that. But there's a sense of emotional safety and security in being a part of this group. There's a lot of work that you can do. There's a whole literature on developing, and in fact, in the management studies in businesses, on how you develop teams that operate well together. A lot of it is based on providing a sense of psychological safety so that people can share things and feel like they can help contribute towards creativity without being shut down immediately. Sense of belonging and identification is feeling like people fit in, has a place in the group, they're accepted by the group, but then they're also willing to sacrifice for the group. And then personal investment is the amount of time, resources, energy. These can be defined in lots of different ways that people are willing to put in. The more people invest, the more they'll feel like they have to invest in order to be a part of this. You can't have people who are a part of your leadership structure who aren't actually doing the work, right? And then a common symbol system. This is logos. This is jerseys. It's flags. It's tattoos, ceremonies. This can kind of seem like a throwaway category, but it actually might be important to introduce some kinds of ritual behaviors that people engage in. So it could be as simple as every Friday afternoon, we have a Zoom call where we check in with each other. It becomes kind of a tradition, becomes something that people expect, that they look forward to, that they remember years down the line. Thinking through how you can create those traditions can help you achieve membership. So here are a couple examples. On the left, you can see the dress. You can also imagine that these Girl Scouts are, they've put in a lot of time, the parents as well. They even have a symbol that they use that everybody knows what that means. On the right, you can clearly tell that these belong to different groups, right? There's a little bit of a definition of who one is by who one is not, who the values that one has by the values that one does not have. And then there's influence. So people are often more attracted to a community in which they feel like they have influence. That is, there's a community that acknowledges them, understands that they're working hard, that asks for people's feedback and ideas, that shows that they actually have an impact, because that can be really hard in this kind of stuff. It's like you win big or you win nothing. How can you find little ways in between where you can show that people are having an impact that will help them believe that they are efficacious? And then give voice to them too. That can be asking them to present something or to speak, or it can be even as simple as somebody who I identify as like me. If I see them speaking, I also can feel acknowledged through that. Couple examples. Andrew Yang actually does this really well online. So on the top, we see, as you all keep donating, we'll keep giving. Being able to help others during this time is an awesome thing. So giving kind of an emotional, not a jolt, but like a little bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling about the impact that I have by chipping in $2 or whatever it is. But also, I mean, all three of these are good examples. Acknowledging people's struggles, saying, somebody told me yesterday that they're going to do more for others because of me. That felt great to hear. He doesn't name them, but that person knows who they are. They're going to be committed forever. On the right, people showing up to an event, turning out to an event. They are thinking of one person in particular that they're not very excited about, that they're very supportive of. It's a cause. They feel like they're doing something by seeing each other together. The third is, as I said, you can call it reinforcement of behavior. Are people getting what they need by participating? Or is this kind of like an added burden to what they have going on in the rest of their lives? Is it worth their investment? This is a primary function of a strong community. If you wrap functions in, functions into the operation of the community that people need. So the one that I think of immediately is childcare. If it is prohibitive for me to participate because I just don't have somebody to watch my kids, I can't do it. How can you begin to roll that into your efforts? So effective rewards can be things like the status of their membership. They feel cool because they are a member. Another reward can be the success of the community that they're a part of. It can be skill building, so the competence or the capabilities that they get by participating. So leadership training is a good example of that, but also there are lots of different kinds of trainings that you can provide. Things that, as Jeff was saying earlier, catalyze some form of transformation within them that can reinforce their participation. And then also, you can tell how well you're doing on this by seeing not just my influence on the community, but also the community's influence on me and my behavior. That will be an indication of how important it is to me. So a couple examples here. On the left, we've got somebody who's part of SAG, which is something that if anybody has ever acted before, it is something that is very, very hard to get. Once you're in the union, you have a lot of rights and are paid at an actual living wage. But it is something that is definitely a status marker in addition to providing material benefits. On the right, this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, finding each other and having people support one another as they go through this thing that they need to change in their lives can be very, very powerful. And then the last thing is shared emotional connection. So this is one reason that big events can bring people together. So they can be positive or negative in valence, but it's something that seems to catalyze a shift within the community. Frequency, contact can usually mean frequency of contact, but it also matters the quality of that contact. And then, as I mentioned earlier, closure to events. How do you put a cap on it? Debrief. That allows you to make sense of what happened and to kind of incorporate it into the autobiographical narrative, but also the autobiographical narrative of the movement, of the effort. And then don't underestimate the power of lifting people up. Humiliation, I wouldn't use that for the community, but I would say that it's something that like to think through that in terms of accountability can be very powerful, and it ties people's emotions to the group. So here's an example of that from, gosh, now 2 years ago. March for Our Lives, there was a group of high school kids in Wisconsin who decided that they were going to march 50 miles over, I believe, 5 days to the Capitol, to Madison, from their school to demand change in gun legislation. It was incredible how they pulled it all together. All these high school students did it themselves. They posted about it all the way through. People started joining their caravan. They met up and had meals and played games together at night. And then finally, on the final day, they had gone through this experience together. And even all the people who were watching online through their tweets and all that, they felt like they had been participating in a way. And so this kind of encapsulates the feeling that only 5 days, that the feeling was so strong that they were hugging each other, that they formed some very important connections that was going to continue their organizing in the future as well. This is a good example of how mobilizing can turn into organizing. So we are getting up to 5:30. I want to make sure that we have time to answer questions about this. I do have one last section, which is essentially taking these factors and applying it to the teams that you're working with now. And so I want to just kind of take a second to get a pulse from you guys. What would feel most productive? Would you like to talk about these some more, or would you like to kind of dig in on the worksheet? We can do a bit of both too. Also, include in that, how tired are you? 2 hours is a long time. We can also like chop this up, and I can send you the worksheet, and we can do questions. and then kind of call it a day. But I want to leave it up to you to tell me how you guys are doing.
I think I'd be quite happy to get into the worksheet.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, worksheet sounds great. Mel said in the comments worksheet as well. I'm into it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to, oh gosh, I don't know how to do this. Man, I need to be better at Zoom. I think what I'll do is I'll stop screen sharing because then I can actually see the chat. Wait a minute. Maybe I figured it out. Here we go. Ha! I figured it out. Okay. I'm going to drop in the chat the link to the worksheet. It's view only, so why don't you, it's a Google Doc. Why don't you make a copy and then edit away? Essentially, what we're trying to do in this section, I have a few slides on this, but basically they're intuitive. That Twitter is really hard to build relationships. You can do it. Things like Twitter lists can help you keep track of a network and kind of see what people are posting, and you can follow that more directly. But it's really good for expanding the scope of conflict here and getting public attention. So a lot of regular people are not necessarily on Twitter. It's a lot of reporters. It's a lot of representatives and public officials. But it's hard to organize and like points for people who are creative and can figure out how to do that. Same thing with Facebook and Instagram. It's not same thing for Facebook and Instagram. It's not the easiest, but it is possible. The function here is more to fire up your base. But the other thing is you can't be everywhere. It's really, really hard. You know, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever else, you're going to spread yourself thin and your strategy is going to take a back seat. Instead, think about how you can leverage whatever platforms that are available to you to accomplish the functions of organizing, mobilizing, building bonding capital, and then leveraging that through bridging capital. So that is the purpose of this worksheet. I'll leave this up for you while you work on it. And why don't we say, give you 10 minutes. So 5:43. And if you need the link to the doc, it's in the chat. Okay. Maybe Felicity, do you want to pause, or what would you guys prefer? That we pause the recording or edit it out?
I basically, at this stage, I don't know how much detail people are going in. If this is a part of the detail that we want people to be able to learn from, or if it's going to expose other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, then maybe we can ask to edit it out if necessary. Would anybody like to share either what they have down or what was difficult, what feels like is left in doubt?
And start us off. I think that, thank you for providing this worksheet. I think it was a really good exercise. And I think I get ideas from doing this. I feel like we could use this as a tool in our own organizing efforts, like as a reflection tool. And I think we could, to the latter questions around like how can we like leverage some of the social media or like platforms to develop organizing. I think that we could potentially meet on Facebook or like have like a Facebook group or something like that along those lines, where we post like a worksheet like this and then people kind of reply with what they said. And so I think just thinking creatively about like how do we kind of allow some of that reflection to happen, and I think that would be pretty great. But I think like I really appreciate like the three questions that you had in terms of like who is your team, but who are they really, and but who are they really, and I think that was great. And I think it's revealed a lot in terms of like, well, who are the people who are stepping up to do a lot of the work, and I think that a lot of the people who have been stepping up have been, you know, like women, queer folks, and like non-binary folks, and femmes, and etc. And I think that has been a good reflection to think about like, well, maybe we need to do more things to kind of mitigate some of those divisions of labor. But I've also been like proud to see like, well, who are the people who are stepping up in terms of leadership of care. And I think that kind of stuff has been really good in terms of leadership. So it's not just the instrumental stuff of we need to get people to withhold grades or whatever. And I think that has been something that I've appreciated. Yeah, but that's just some rambling thoughts in terms of like what I felt in terms of like going through this exercise.
That's good. Being grounded in your people, seeing how that may or may not need to change roles, whatever. That's where it all flows from. Anybody else? This is also something that might be useful to come back to over and over. Both in terms of, you know, you could separate the first section from the second, and over time see, okay, how has my team changed? Or you can also say, where am I right now? We need to take an inventory. What are the things that we're using? What are the things that are taking up too much time because they're not actually doing a good job of building the relationships that we need? Or it's not turning people out like we need them to. And then if there's one thing about tech, it's that there's always going to be another platform. And it is both frustrating and freeing, because people are always thinking about how to fill the needs. So you know, I've never actually been on TikTok, maybe, but the lens that I would use is, wow, okay. The lens that I would use is this helping me reach new people, build relationships with those people, as well as the people that I need to keep strong, my core dynamic. And then like, if it's a mobilization tool, that's fine too. I mean, people have been using Tinder, right? There are all kinds of creative ways that you can use things, different platforms to reach people, but like, know and always have centered who your people are, what they need, whether you are investing further in the relationships with them, or if it's a time to flex the capacity that you have built, and doing so in a way that the decision makers are going to feel the most, in a public way, in a way that targets the things that hurt the most, and doing so in a way that's both going to increase your credibility as well as forward your agenda. So that's what I've got for today. Give love to get love. You have to work, especially on digital. But use the 4 factors and I can also, for those of you who are on the call, I don't have a Google Doc necessarily. I have a PDF And if I'm doing my good organizer thing, Jeff and Mel and whoever else, you have a way to keep in touch with people, great. Then I can send the PDF along to people so that they can see the 4 factors of membership, influence, integration, fulfillment of needs, and shared emotional connection. I keep coming back to that. It's something that was extremely important to me as a digital organizer, because all of the other metrics that people go by are how much money do you raise, how many clicks do you get, how many watches do you get, or plays, or whatever, views, terminology. And those are not actually the things that tell you about the relationships. So I'll leave the last, I guess, 10 minutes for kind of taking away an aha. So this is what we went through today. Taking away an aha moment, like what's one thing that you're going to take away from this, and one next step. So sorry, Sheila, if this is a little sudden for you, but maybe if you feel to, you can also contribute an aha moment or a next step.
Let me know if you want to pause the recording before you speak, if anybody wants to speak on an aha moment or next step that they don't want recorded.
I guess my aha moment would be realizing that in this marathon of organizing that's been happening for the past couple of months, I've taken very little time to step back and reflect on it critically. And think about who I am organizing alongside, and what are strategies that are in line with your goals. So it was nice to just think about it. I was like, oh, this is really hard.
It's hard.
Next steps is honestly probably filling out this worksheet in more depth, because the 7 minutes I spent thinking about it were very instructive, and I'm hoping it will lead to being more purposeful with how I approach digital engagement, because I'm very much in a panicky post everywhere all the time, everything they have to see us, we're online, we can't see each other face to face. Yeah, I don't know if that's a concrete action thing.
That's great. No, that's great.
I think for me, it was definitely because I've been very spare on social media in general, because I just never liked engaging with it that much. And I never really had a reason to beyond being social. And now that there's this political community building, I was like, crap, you probably should have nurtured more of an online presence by now. So it's I don't have a Twitter, I don't have an Instagram. And it's well, maybe pick one and be really disciplined in how you build it up, even though it's going to take a while. Obviously, this is a long-term fight. We know we're going to be fighting for the next couple of years. So yeah, figuring out how to do that.
I would say that the phone can be a digital tool too. If you don't like reaching out to people and having little, back and forths on social media, that's okay. You can use the telephone. Maybe the drawback is that you won't have as much reach for mobilization. And you the benefit of digital tools is that you can achieve scale, but often picking up the phone is the technology you need. Or Zoom.
I think one thing that I can take out of this is I think the membership, influence, integration, and shared emotional connection, and particularly some of the actionable parts of this are fulfillment of needs. So for shared emotional connection, I think having some more of that lifting people up. And so I think that can be as simple as looking back at my emails and saying okay, maybe there can be a couple more sentences here in terms of trying to lift people up and emphasizing that kind of shared emotional connection. And I think debriefs as well. And I think we've been moving more toward debriefs. And so I think having some more structured debriefs is a good way forward.
That's great. I love how specific that is.
I think for
I'd
myself,
say
oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
you go for it.
All right. I was just gonna quickly say, even though I'm not technically part of the movement, yeah, I'm not really part of the movement. I would say, looking into my own organization, looking at myself, I would say my big aha moment from this presentation is realizing how important or like how big these deep social connections are, and I guess you can look at social media as a way for a way to create those opportunities to create those deeper connections. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I'd say my aha moment was like thinking intentionally about structure in very specific ways. I really liked the juxtaposition that you talked about between the snowflake model and the distributed model, and the implications that has for relationship building. I think that's something that like maybe a next step would be to think about how we can leverage the existing structures, say in our departments, and use those to build the kinds of intentional movement structures that could facilitate relationships and translate into strategic capacity.
That's good. I like that, especially because digital tools can help you build that structure too. So, Jeff and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, but the example that I gave of having a Friday evening Zoom call and making that a tradition can help you kind of impose structure, which might actually be really nice in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty and there isn't much structured social interaction. So thinking through how some of the digital tools that you have can be tools for developing your leadership group or developing the team that you're trying to build. So I think there's a lot to be creative about there.
Am I the last one?
I think you
so.
are.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm sorry, I had to come late. I was on one of those Friday afternoon work hour, happy hour things. But aha moments. I think that, I really enjoy this worksheet, and I feel like I have known before about organizing versus mobilizing, and I never thought about how that intersects with digital tools. So, and how certain digital tools have affordances that make them better for mobilizing or better for organizing. And yeah, my next steps, I'm just starting to, I could really relate to what Felicity was saying about being like, shit, I hate social media tools, I'm behind. And I'm just starting to use, through Strike University, use our Instagram and Twitter. And I'm just gonna think about ways. So far, we just post a ton of shit, and a bunch of people are like, yeah, yay, heart, 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 heart. It's a little bit like what Sheila shared about post all the time as much as possible. And I'm gonna think now much more strategically about how to post in a way that creates longer term engagement from people. So yeah. So thank you, Alex.
That's great. Thanks so much, everybody, for making time for this. And I hope anybody who's watching the recording has found it helpful as well. I would love to point you to the survey form, feedback form that Jeff just dropped in the chat box. Please do make sure to fill that out. I welcome any and all feedback. And if you ever have any questions or need to get in touch, I guess I can put my stuff in the chat box. How about that? That's not going to be recorded and online. My email, I'll drop my email in there. So thank you, everyone. If anybody has any last questions, now is the time. Otherwise, I think that's a night.
Melanie, let's connect about social media stuff, because it's a struggle. And thank you so much. I'm so sorry for my lateness.
Oh, that's all right.
Thanks so much for doing this. This was really great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
And y'all, in the feedback form, if there are other topics you'd like to see trainings on, please put that in there because that helps us shape what we offer.
Sounds good.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye. Take care.